The video you're about to see is part of a new, sixth form produced project that we're calling Rougemont Reveal. We'll be producing a new video around every term, focusing on a wide variety of student-chosen topics on life at Rougemont School. For our first episode, we've decided to focus on our school's production of Les Miserables, discussing not only our drama department's chosen interpretation of the script, but also on how this timeless story has been adapted, evolved, and produced throughout history. We hope you enjoy.
The year is 1832, and France, once arguably the globe's greatest power, lies in tatters. The first revolution of 1789 had descended to the tyrannical dictatorship of the Directory, its lofty ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity giving way to the mass bloodletting of thousands of innocent Parisians, while the military autocracy that inherited the country dragged 3 million French soldiers and civilians to their untimely ends in the ultimately unwinnable Napoleonic Wars. It was the throne of this hollowed-out husk of a nation that would eventually be won by the House of Orleans, with the Bourbons, France's rulers for 2 centuries, being deposed for the final time by the roaring riots of the July Revolution. These new rulers, however, would themselves face cascading waves of successive crises, with a cholera epidemic responsible for 90,000 deaths, constant strikes and industrial action, and organized opposition from monarchists and republicans alike, rendering their hard-earned position increasingly precarious. The greatest head of state the world has ever known would have had trouble tackling these challenges, and if there is any one definitive statement that can be made about his reign, let it be that France's new king, Louis-Philippe Orleans, was not the greatest head of state Paris had ever known, let alone the world. Steeped in rumors about conspirational cartels, corruption, and even alleged assassination from the day he first sat the throne, he responded to mass popular discontent with heavy-handed violence and mass political purges, creating an atmosphere of repression, censorship, and coercion that would plague the populace for decades to come.
Madame Monroe,
Bonjour.
What was France like in 1832, the time period when Les Miserables is set?
In 1832, the living conditions for the working class were appalling. Therefore, the June rebellion took place, and in this rebellion, the Republicans attempted to reverse the establishment. The rebellion was fueled by economic hardship and a big cholera epidemic. The rebellion was rapidly totally crushed by the establishment, but it led to the Second French Revolution, also called les Trois Glorieuses, or in English, the July Revolution. So I think it was just, the working class was just living in appalling conditions, really.
Really is extraordinary, with just how tumultuous and influential this time period is. Just how little it's known about in the English-speaking world. So the Bourbon Restoration was going on at the time, the restoral of the monarchy. Do you think that this had a significant impact on French culture and politics?
Well, after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, the Bourbon monarchy restored. and the Republicans felt betrayed by this new establishment, by the regime. They rebelled then against the wealth distribution and even the justice system. They felt that all was corrupted with money and power. The working class had once again had no voice, no rights in the world, in France.
The author Victor Hugo was a French poet and novelist who had initially trained to be a lawyer. He was known to fight for the rights of the destitute and impecunious. Hugo lived in a time of great social unrest, partly driven by the cholera epidemic, which shined a light on the inequities of French society. In 1852, Louis Napoleon rose to power in a coup d'etat and declared himself Emperor of France. Hugo vehemently opposed Napoleon's sudden rise to power. This resulted in his exile to Guernsey for 15 years, where he wrote Les Mis. Set in 19th century France, Hugo uses Les Mis to critique the injustices of the time. Les Mis follows the life of Jean Valjean, a man imprisoned for 19 years after stealing a loaf of bread to feed his impoverished sister's children. Upon his release, the hardened criminal embarks on a journey of redemption for his sins. During his quest for absolution, he must escape the unrelenting police inspector, Javert, for breaking his parole. During the play, Valjean heroically saves a young girl from a life of mistreatment and cruelty. The pair journey across France in the hope to escape the wrath of Javert, eventually finding themselves in amidst the French Revolution. Les Mis presents a vast panorama of Parisian society and its underworld. Valjean's pessimistic outlook on life, viewing it as merely an amalgamation of lies, violence, and cruelty, can be considered a reflection of Hugo's own view. The title itself, which literally translates to the wretched ones or the miserable ones, is a reminder of the despair and hopelessness of the time. Despite the great social and political struggles, the characters of the play demonstrate bravery, passion, and love for each other. But will their naive hope, dreams, and resolve withstand the harshness of the time?
He took my childhood in his stride, but he was gone when autumn came.
What made you choose Les Miserables as the school production?
When I first started the school, I remember a meeting in Mrs. Benson Dugdale's kitchen, and where we were discussing which show to produce. And she told me then, and this was back in the summer of 2019, that the school were desperate to stage Les Mis. So I didn't feel that we were ready to at that point because I didn't know anyone. And so now actually is the first time I felt that the school was ready to produce such an iconic musical as this.
What would you say is the most important message or theme within the play? What could we as an audience learn from it?
So I think the most important message of the play is to do with compassion, actually, and having empathy for other people. And so the most important thing is how we treat other people. And if we take the character of Jean Valjean, he is a man that has been treated poorly. You know, he stole bread to save his sort of dying niece or nephew, and he's been sent to prison. He's served his time, and yet nobody is allowing him at the start to forget those crimes. They're sort of, treating him badly at the start. And the bishop recognises that, we have to give people a chance, but also we have to feel compassion for them and empathy for them. And I think that, he does good. The rest of his life, he does good, and he takes care of Cosette. He takes on this dying woman's child, raises her as his own. And so he really teaches us how, the importance of how we treat other people. And I think the other message really is, how strong the kind of human soul can be when it's tested, and the resilience of his character is something that we should all strive to have, but also that compassion as well.
How have you adapted the play to convey your vision?
Okay, so when you take a script, you have to perform it exactly as it is. You cannot adapt it or change it. However, there are certain little moments that are not in the script that I've added in that I just quite like. An example of this is where Cosette is added into the hospital scene. So Fantine is dying in her bed and she can see little Cosette sort of in the distance. And so that's not in the script that she's on stage, but we've added her on stage because I think it adds, it really helps the audience to feel how tragic this situation is and how, she's just in reaching distance of her daughter, but she can't quite get there. So that's something we added in. We also then added Fantine into Cosette's opening scene. So again, that's not in the script, but I felt that, again, she's behind Cosette and she's reaching out for her, and Cosette is reaching forward for her mother and can't quite reach her. So it just adds to the sadness of both those scenes, and it really, for me as a mother with a little girl, it kind of really made me feel, almost wanted to shed a tear at that point. So that's what I want. I want the audience to cry. So that's the reason why I added those bits in.
What is going to surprise people most about this production?
I think the thing that will surprise our audiences the most is how professional the overall production looks, when they come and see it on each night. We have set, costume, lights, props, as well as, how professional the actors are. A cast of 81 on stage, and they come together really well. And I think parents and audiences will be really impressed by the standard. It's an incredibly challenging show. It's completely sung through from start to end. There is no rest, there's no breathing space for the cast, yet they cope incredibly well with those challenges. So I think the overriding sense of awe, hopefully, from the audience as to how talented the cast are and how professional the production is overall.
Women were terribly exploited in 19th century France because society was set up in a way that served men. With divorces being illegal and women legally only allowed to work certain jobs, most women were driven to ruin. Women like Fantine, who is one of the main characters and is a reflection of the plight of women at the time of the novel's writing. She is beautiful, but naive and illiterate. She has never known family and grew up on the streets. She is manipulated by a man and is abandoned with child. Fantine entrusts her daughter Cosette to the care of the crooked innkeepers Monsieur and Madame Thénardier, and regularly sends them money nearly beyond her means. However, they keep demanding more payments that Fantine cannot make. She loses her factory job when fired by Jean Valjean for lying about having a child, and is convinced by a travelling merchant to sell her long hair and 2 perfect front teeth. She becomes ill and has to begin exploiting herself to make ends meet. Fantine is then arrested by insulting a client, but she collapses and is taken to the local hospital. Deathly ill, she clings to life only because a remorseful Jean Valjean has promised to bring Cosette to her. He fails and she passes away, never seeing her beloved daughter again. Fantine's story is unjust and cruel, reflecting the sad and desperate nature of the lives of women in 19th century urban France. Cosette, Fantine's daughter, faces a similarly unjust fate, at least at the start. From about 3 years old, when she is left by her mother with 2 aforementioned innkeepers, for 5 years she is mistreated and used as their servant, and isn't provided sufficient clothing or even a place to sleep. She has no childhood aside from her age. No one seems to care for the mistreatment of children during 19th century France because it is seen as the norm, unless you come from a wealthy background. Thankfully, she is eventually saved by Jean Valjean and has a chance at a better future. However, this suggests that France's classist society not only affects lower-class working men and women, but the innocent children as well. Overall, life for the vulnerable wasn't pleasant. During this time period, they could not escape the objectification, marginalisation, and exploitation of the patriarchal structure of French society.
How do you feel playing your role as a woman in modern day society?
I definitely feel that playing Cosette as a woman in our modern day society shows me the lack of freedom and choices that young girls had about their future compared to the freedom that we have now. And also how lucky we can be to be given the opportunity to achieve something more in our lives. And I think that's really reflected in the way when thinking about how the lower and higher classes are treated by others in the play.
What is the biggest challenge of your role and how have you attempted to overcome this?
I don't feel like I had many challenges with my role compared to the other characters, but I think I did struggle to show the two different sides of Cosette, where one is more innocent and positive, whereas the other is lonely from living with her dad and struggling to decide for herself what she wants in life. I did overcome this, though, by adapting the energy that I put into certain scenes, so some seem a bit sadder than others.
Has your experience from playing this role developed your awareness of the struggles women have faced throughout history?
I definitely feel that it's changed my awareness to how we treat others based on genders and the way that we look, especially with those who are not as lucky to have the same opportunities as us. But regarding particularly women, I do think that playing in Les Mis has made me realise how far we've come equality-wise, as well as the improvements society has made around the expectations of women and what they can do for our own community.
What did you do to prepare for your role?
Lots of hard work inside of school and outside of school, rehearsals pretty much every lunchtime, after school. It's just been a lot of hard work, but hopefully it'll pay off. Theatre. It's a role that all male singers would aspire to play at some point during their career, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of that.
Do you find the music particularly challenging?
Oh yes, yeah. It's a lot different to music that I usually sing, but I enjoy the challenge and I enjoy pushing myself to the limits of my capabilities.
To what extent would you consider your character to be moral?
I think that's a really good question. I think because the show is all about Jean Valjean's morality and his judgment of situations. So he's in prison for 19 years for stealing a loaf full of bread, but he stole that in order to save his sister's child from starving. So was that the right decision? And the whole show is just about his path to redemption, raising Fantine's child, who he was at somewhat responsible for her death.
Accompanying the longest-running musical in history since its release in 1985, Claude Michel Schonberg's Tony-winning soundtrack has left a mark on history almost as great as did the play itself. Schonberg composed the music to mirror the mood of the play, creating a natural connection between the music and drama. This symbiotic relationship, whereby the music follows what the drama is expressing, contributed in making Les Mis the emotionally powerful piece it is now renowned as. It provided many of the most well-known and treasured songs in musical history, such as I Dreamed a Dream, On My Own, and Do You Hear the People Sing? In an interview, Schonberg compares the structure of the musical to a bridge, to highlight the importance of the beginning connecting to the end in a beautiful arc. In order to achieve this in Les Mis, he incorporated leitmotifs, which are recurrent themes throughout a musical associated with a character or situation, to link the ends of the show together. Not only does this signify the emotional importance of points in the storyline, it creates a sense of resolution for the audience. Overall, the play presents a strong sense of musical unity, with different musical elements intensifying the emotions at pivotal points during the play.
How effectively, in your opinion, are motifs used throughout the musical?
Well, motifs, better known as leitmotifs, have been traditionally used through opera forever. In this particular musical, you think of the motif. For people who don't really know what motifs are, if you think of Star Wars, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, ba-dum. Well, who's that coming in? Who do you associate that music with?
Darth Vader.
Darth Vader, yeah. You hear that motif and you imagine Darth Vader coming in, and this is no different in Les Mis. For instance, there's a motif for Valjean, and that you hear that throughout the musical many times, and generally when Valjean is about to appear.
It was undeniable. France during the 19th century was a cesspit of poverty, exploitation, and death. Still healing and rebuilding from the wounds of the devastating Napoleonic Wars, Paris, the French capital, was once again thrown into desolation during the June Rebellion. Paris, where Les Mis was set, was one of the filthiest, most pestilential and savagely overcrowded cities in the world. And these streets were a major part of the problem. Along with the countless rats, fleas, and the diseases they carried, the cholera epidemic also came and flourished in the streets and sewers. As previously mentioned, the Parisian Republicans fought against Louis Philippe's army. During the riots that ensued, those of lower classes in Paris worked to build barricades in the poorest quarters of the city, those overpopulated areas that were also inhabited by the lower classes. The fighters, most of them unemployed construction workers, built their barricades with cut stones, overturned carriages, and household furniture.
The themes of social injustice, unrest, and the importance of love and compassion are as relevant today as they were in the 1830s. As Victor Hugo himself once said, as long as ignorance and poverty still exist, books of the nature of Les Miserables cannot fail to be important. Thank you.